customers' success was dependent on them getting a waiver to break the rules. They needed to get a permission to break Part 107 regulations and operate
It's kind of like a hall pass. Welcome again to the Unmanned Podcast powered by USI. I'm Matt Hernandez, your host, and today we speak with Kyle Miller, Censys Technologies Director of Sales. In this episode, Kyle and I speak about beyond visual line of sight flying, the upcoming regulatory changes, and Censys drone technology. Finally, as a fellow poker nut, we might hear tips on how to win money. Or not. Let's go. Hello, Kyle. Welcome to the Unmanned Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Matt. Good to see you again.
Why don't you start with telling the audience a little bit about your background and Censys Technologies and what's going on there?
Yeah, so my name is Kyle Miller. I graduated from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University here in Daytona.
Go Eagles.
Yep. So I was a Daytona Beach campus guy. Didn't have to move too far to pick up a job with Censys in 2018. Censys was in the research park at Embry-Riddle. So got to move roughly 0 feet, aka stay where I was with my lease, and picked up an internship with Censys in 2018 in January. That was 3 months, and then boom, full-time right after that. And then here we are, fast forward to today. So about 7.5 years into my career in the UAS industry, all with Censys. I think I always tell people that a drone year is like a dog year, so when I started, I had a lot more hair. I was young and spry and,
Yeah, I was just thinking about that 7 years. You must be old hat there. You're like one of the OGs.
I think I was employee number 7, and not to say that we have like 5,000 or anything, but I was employee number 6 or 7. They brought me in to kind of start building a little bit of a sales channel. At the time, it was kind of a tall task because the product line was wildly different than it is today, aka borderline non-existent in 2018. But as I mentioned, everything changes so fast in the UAS industry that it wasn't long before we kind of found our stride, found our niche, and fast forward to today, and we have a team of sales folks, a bunch of really good partners like USI on the training side to kind of standardize the workforce that are buying our aircraft and deploying our aircraft in the NAS. Everything around the machine has kind of standardized quite a bit over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think that's why we're seeing some of the adoption that we're seeing is because folks have a pathway to use the aircraft at scale.
Talk briefly about that too. I know, and we'll get to kind of the Sentaero 6 and 5 and the technologies, and we'll get to that. But what did you guys start off with, and how did that kind of evolve to the Sentaero 6 and 5?
So, with the name Sentaero 6, it makes people think that we've gone Sentaero 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and now we're on 6. That's only partially true. So we've called things different names over the years, but when I first started, the team was working on a couple of things. They were working on a patented catapult solution, which was obviously relevant to the drone at the time. But it was also something that we were pretty interested in from a broader use perspective. It was a continuous torque catapult. So that was interesting. That project kind of came and went. But the aircraft wise, it was largely COTS airframes with COTS sensors integrated and trying to tie the rest of the value proposition together between, being forward thinking in 2018, thinking about things like training, thinking about things like the regulatory process, and trying to make BVLOS operations commonplace in the commercial industry. So our 2 co-founders have backgrounds in human factors engineering and aerospace engineering between Textron, GE Aviation, and Gulfstream. And there was a lot of things that they thought could be better for the commercial marketplace than the way some of these other larger, defense primes, for lack of a better way to put it, were going about their thoughts on the commercial industry. So Censys was working largely on stuff like runway dependent fixed wings, hand launched belly landed fixed wings, that flew for a while, 3-ish hours, Sony cameras, some of the early MicaSense cameras. But largely those have pretty big limitations for a lot of commercial use cases, especially right-of-way work. and the hand-launched belly-landed phase ended in about 2019 in favor of VTOL platforms.
I mean, that shows that there was a lot of evolution in the ideas and kind of what the offerings were from Censys, and I think it just shows broadly that that's a snapshot in the industry as a whole. I think it's not a special story from Censys. I mean, a lot of the OEM and manufacturers dealt with the same type of thing, finding challenges and finding solutions for them. And I think you all did a really good job of being flexible with the industry and making sure you were pivoting quickly enough to answer those needs in the industry. And so for the audience, a lot of today, this being episode 4, a lot of today we'll talk about some of the drone technologies that Censys has in the broader scope of the industry, as well as BVLOS operations in today's market. That's the focus of today's conversation. And again, for our audience who might not be familiar with what BVLOS or VLOS is, can you briefly discuss the differences between those two modes of flights and what that means for daily operations in the drone industry?
Under the federal regulations, under Part 107, mandates that you continuously be able to determine attitude and orientation of the drone. And if you can, you're operating within visual line of sight. The pilot that can see, the remote pilot in command can see and determine attitude and orientation of the drone, and boom, you are within visual line of sight. In practice, obviously it's plus or minus depending on weather conditions and environmental factors like view shed and the trees around you and how big of a drone you're flying and day or night, and these types of things impact that. But to put it in a real ballpark perspective, that's about 1 mile away. Visual line of sight, you can pretty much, not me, my eyes stink, but maybe a mile for me on a really perfect day if I put my contacts in and whatnot. But yeah. I can determine attitude and orientation about 1 mile away for the Sentaero. For smaller platforms, that might be much less, but that is all the visual line of sight world. When you're producing and selling and manufacturing and engineering and building an ecosystem around fixed wings, 1 mile is not an efficient way to use the aerodynamic efficiencies associated with fixed wing flight. So when you can fly, previously for an hour, now with the Sentaero 6, we're talking about multiple hours, being constrained to operations 1 mile from the pilot, especially in linear applications like power lines or pipelines or waterways or roadways or things like that. 1 mile is pretty limiting. So we have always focused our efforts on enabling beyond visual line of sight, which is exactly it's the opposite of visual line of sight. You can no longer see the aircraft. You break visual line of sight from the RPIC and you continue to navigate, waypoint missions from there. That's kind of always been our focus. Historically, we've had solutions that fit both the BVLOS need and then more accessible, cheaper drones, for lack of a better way to put it, that fit more of that VLOS need. Last year, Censys made the cut and said, we're BVLOS only. We're going to cater to the linear infrastructure market, and we're going to make BVLOS so easy for them, and the value proposition is going to be so strong, people are going to be getting in line. And we're starting to see that adoption, which I think is really exciting.
Especially for our audience, I think they'll see the value in beyond visual line of sight flight, commonly referred to as BVLOS. But it sounds like we're constrained today in Part 107, or, I know we're constrained today with having to do waivers and special permissions to conduct BVLOS flight. What do you see in the future? I know there's talk of 108 and other regulations, and especially Canada has some regulations that's coming out to support BVLOS flight. But, can you explain briefly, kind of the landscape of the regulatory environment with the executive orders that came out recently supporting BVLOS flight and the 108 rule?
You're absolutely spot on. I mean, our customer success was dependent on them getting a waiver to break the rules. They needed to get a permission to break Part 107 regulations and operate outside.
Kind of like a hall pass. You gotta go and check something out.
Our customers were dependent on getting that permission to break 107 rules, obviously legally. When we get to a position of rulemaking that can govern safely the integration of aircraft like the Sentaero into the NAS and protect people and property on the ground through common sense rulemaking, that will be very exciting. I think the executive orders, and especially as it relates to Part 108 mandates and deadlines and getting to an NPRM, which for those that don't know, NPRM stands for a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Once that goes live, which I think we're 10 or 15 days into the 30-day deadline, when the executive orders came out, it basically said, hey, FAA, in 30 days, you need to publish a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that will allow for comment from industry and the public. 240 days after that, we need to have a final BVLOS rule. The expectations for that rule are pretty much guided by what the Aviation Rulemaking Committee, all the recommendations made by those folks. I believe that was 2021. It seems like yesterday, but it's been 4 years, I guess.
Quite some time ago.
So deadlines have come and gone over the last few years as it relates to getting this rule in place. I'm optimistic now that it seems that there's a renewed spirit and a renewed push to get rulemaking over the line. As it relates to our customers, given the crawl, walk, run approach that Part 108 will likely look like, it's not going to do a whole lot for Censys customers with their Sentaero tomorrow. We're still going to have to get waivers, but it will do a lot to rising tides lift all ships. It will do a lot to unlock BVLOS operations in real low risk areas for a low risk CONOP. I'd be curious to get your take as well, Matt. I look at like what Transport Canada announced from a rulemaking perspective, sheltered operations, AKA shielded operations, being in place November 4th, Class G airspace, sparsely populated areas, limited radius from the GCS. These are all steps in the right direction to unlock BVLOS for all different types of technology. But if I tried to sell a Sentaero by telling someone they can fly out to 4 miles, only in Class G airspace, only in sparsely populated areas, our customers would look at me like I'm crazy because they've been doing far more than that for the last 6 years.
I agree. I think there is a balance between what next regulations will do for unlocking the industry. I think there's going to be a lot of goodness in there, and I expect to see a lot of movement, but I think there'll still be some challenges with the restrictions that are going to be there. And kind of, pivoting into that, there's some talk about a training requirement and what have you heard about that, and how is that going to be formulated? Because that might be something else that is palatable to your customers that might not, love the restriction of the distance, but they understand the need for training and having proficiency at using complicated or complex systems, I should say.
Well, the need for a stronger requirement on personnel qualification, honestly, I think the entire industry is excited for that. It is harder to get your driver's license than it is to get your drone license. You can argue whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, but at least to get your driver's license, you have to go drive a car in front of somebody and demonstrate that you can turn the wheel left and right and know where the brake is compared to the gas pedal. You don't need to do any of that to get your Part 107. And technically, you don't need to do any of that to operate your Sentaero. Now, obviously you do, because Censys is never going to sell an aircraft to someone that doesn't go through more rigorous flight training than the Part 107 written exam. But honestly, Censys and USI have seen this coming, along with many others, for many years. That is why we hitched our horse to the cart of USI many, many years ago, because we knew that eventually when the industry got to advanced rulemaking that governed a stronger degree of personnel qualification, that it would be business as usual for us, because our customers have been getting USI certifications for the last 5+ years. So they're going to be ahead of the curve. They already are ahead of the curve. And I'm excited for USI in many ways, because it'll be a forced and necessary adoption of stronger standards for the rest of the industry. So I think where you guys have positioned yourselves over the years has been obviously quite a smart decision. Josh is a smart guy, but I think that between the ASTM, the NIST, all these different standards bodies, you guys have positioned yourself nicely to be ahead of the curve when it comes to Part 108 and the personnel qualifications.
Well, we appreciate that. I think USI has always been focused on safety and safety education, and that just is a good partner with manufacturers like yourself who want to make sure that quality and professional aviators are utilizing their systems. And so it was just a good partnership to begin with. Moving on to kind of that technology component for BVLOS flight, we talked about being able to see the attitude of the aircraft, and having something like the Sentaero Six many, many miles away, you obviously can't do it. What kind of systems are on board that allow that, kind of understanding and situational awareness that supports BVLOS flight? And then also move on to the technologies that are utilized by drones more broadly, the payload systems, the communication systems. Can you kind of give us a high level overview of those technologies?
I'll give you three, because as you asked that question, three things come to my mind immediately that not everything's been relevant to the Sentaero over the life of the product, but all three of these are relevant to the Sentaero Six now. Couple of differentiators and or technology pieces that make the system reliable enough to, one, be approved to do it, and two, continue to do it reliably, repeatedly, and safely in the national airspace. Probably the first and foremost thing is our optical detect and avoid on the nose of the aircraft. We have integrated that system for about 6 years now, to give us a broader level of airspace awareness and a deconfliction tool when we're operating, at between 200 and in some cases 1,000 feet AGL. We have that additional tactical mitigation to deconflict with other things flying around us.
And for our audience, AGL is above ground level. Sometimes we get too caught up into our aviation terms.
And DAA meaning detect and avoid. So when you're filing for a BVLOS waiver, you're answering two questions, amongst many other questions, but you're answering two fundamental ones: is how do you address and mitigate ground risk, and how do you address and mitigate air risk? I'll hit on the Cassia system in the nose, the optical detect and avoid, is a way to address air risk in part. That's addressing non-cooperative air traffic. That's air traffic that is not transmitting ADS-B. That's the typical gotcha that the agency likes to throw at you, is how do you avoid the crop duster that's not transmitting ADS-B? How do you detect and avoid the uncooperative mosquito control helicopter that might be at 300 feet above ground that's not transmitting ADS-B? How do you detect and avoid those folks? We got it. You have ADS-B. Great. Good for you. You're doing the right thing. But what about the crop duster and the guy in the mosquito control helicopter? That optical detect and avoid gives us that additional layer of mitigation against those threats. So that's another layer that goes into our safety case, and it has for a while.
And unpacking that just a little bit before we move on to the ground risk. So that will actually see that aircraft out there and make a maneuver to maintain its airspace clearance in order to be safe in and around that other aircraft.
Optics is one way to do it. Acoustics is another way to do it. Radar is another way to do it. And if you want to go real old school, a human visual observer is one way to do it as well. You can make a strong argument that the human VO scales the worst out of all those solutions, but we chose optics back in the day, and it hasn't let us down yet when it comes to building on the safety case over time.
Yeah, and I bet every one of those has an advantage and disadvantage, just like you said, with the scaling problem for a visual observer. And moving on to the ground risk, how does the technology address that?
Historically, we've addressed ground risk just by reliability and low risk measures. With the Sentaero Six, we do add a piece of technology to the equation that will grow that permission from where it was, but we were getting ops over people and ops over moving vehicles waivers in addition to the BVLOS waivers for the last year and a half for the Sentaero 5 that did not have a parachute. So the technology that we're adding into the mix is a parachute on the Sentaero 6. What the next 6 to 9 months looks like is getting that parachute ASTM certified so that we can grow the population density thresholds that we're allowed to operate over. So when I say we're adding technology and common sense and a low risk approach, what I mean by that is here's the parachute on the technology side, but on the other side of the equation is just general risk mitigation practices for flight over roadways. So what that actually looks like in practice is we're going to cross any roadway that we want, regardless of traffic volume, cars per minute, amount of lanes, so long as we don't spend more than X amount of time over the roadway throughout the whole mission. So let's say we have a 120-minute mission. we have 2 total minutes worth of exposure over the roadway in that 120-minute mission. That ratio is not a lot. It's a pretty low percentage of our total flight time will be spent over the roadway. That's an acceptable level of risk to the FAA historically. We've gotten it approved without the parachute. We are going to cross any road that we want as well, so long as the population density at the road crossing is under a certain threshold. Now, this sounds like a couple gotchas. Really, the only gotcha is that population density number. However, that population density number, I won't disclose it, but that population density number is really high. So we've been able to provide some degree of durability and reliability reports to the FAA without going through the type certificate process. Censys has not done that. But without going through that process, we've been able to provide reliability reports coupled with low risk strategies, now also coupled with a parachute that's ASTM certified. That trinity allows for quite a bit of liberty when it comes to operating the UA in highly economic benefit type areas.
And I think that's a good approach. I've always been an advocate for reliability being the key component for ground risk. I mean, let's be honest with each other that general aviation can fly a test, experimental aircraft, and they're not worried about ground risk as much as a small drone has to worry about it. And I feel like there's a little bit of disproportional restriction when it comes to ground risk and drone operations. But that's my personal feeling. And as a safety professional, people would be like, what? But I really feel like we can meet those requirements with that reliability targets. And then all the other additional items that you say are just kind of another, layer of that Swiss cheese from that Swiss cheese model that James Reason has made so popular. Give me really quickly, some real world applications that you've seen for BVLOS and how can it be applied for, agriculture, surveillance, or whatever. What have you seen in your experience as one of the greatest success of BVLOS flight?
I'll give you a small example, and then I'll give you a really big picture example. So we have, and I always cite this as it is by far one of my favorite use cases for the Sentaero, for BVLOS operations in general. But it is not by far the biggest operation that we have customers doing to date. But I think this is the example of a really powerful anecdote. So we have a county government customer. They have 18 miles of coastline. They're in Florida. Every time a hurricane rolls through, east or west coast, sand rolls out into the Atlantic. And they have to go provide reports because they want to get the sand replenished and replaced, reimbursable funds through the state. They want a check from the governor to put new sand on the beach to make sure that their beaches remain a key part of their tourism revenue. Historically, getting those sand reports, completing those surveys used to take many, 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 many months, which means that their beach is impacted for many, 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 many months, possibly the following fiscal year. Because they didn't get the reports in time to get it into a budget appropriation or what have you. Now, that county government customer flies the beach in one flight. They're able to get their sand report in one flight that takes roughly 45 minutes. So we took months, and they took, through the leadership of the county, they've been able to take a process that took many months, and again, depending on when the storm hits and the fiscals and all these government stuff, they took potentially a year to a year and a half delay to restore their beaches for homeowners, for locals, for visitors, down to 45 minutes. I think that is one of the powerful, and it's only 18 miles of beach.
That's amazing because it's something you don't quite consider. You could probably replicate that result many times over in different use cases, but I think this is an interesting one because you talk about the economic impact, but there's also probably a safety impact with erosion and, damage to some of those other houses or even infrastructure if a road is along that beach line or something like that. I think that's a great example of something that really impacts a broad scope of people there.
That's an 18-mile use case that, again, is a very important one for the county. Let me give you a big picture one. So I spend a majority of my time in the electric utility industry. So that's a combination of starting. Nowadays, it's more like scaling, but starting and scaling advanced aviation programs within these electric utilities. Whether they're doing it internally or they're contracting it out, that's a majority of my day-to-day. We have a customer up in the Northeast. They have many hundreds of miles of waterways that provide hydropower. They also have overhead transmission and distribution lines as well. They want to know everything about every mile of their infrastructure on a pretty regular cadence. They're historic, and this is across the utility industry as a whole. Maintenance has always been incredibly reactive. Something goes out, let's go fix it. Something needs replacing, let's go replace it. They don't know until there's an outage, a storm, or what have you, or a wildfire in most extreme cases. The utility industry as a whole is really, and I'm thankful for this because it is my day job, they are really adopting a philosophy of proactive understanding of their infrastructure. They want omniscience of their assets. That's something Censys talks about a lot, is omniscience of our assets, of humanity's assets. Our waterways, our roads, our bridges, our tunnels, our transmission infrastructure, our distribution infrastructure, pipeline. We want to know everything about everything because we believe that's the cornerstone of value creation. So thinking about the big BVLOS use case for those folks. With Censys coming out with a dock, a networked solution of docks that have a drone with a 100-mile range going from dock to dock, flying infrastructure, scanning, taking pictures, video, thermal imagery, whatever it might be, whatever the payload is, completing a task 100 miles apart, landing in the dock, recharging, data offload. With a network of those, that utility, a small network of those, that's the important part. It's not going to take $2 billion to accomplish this. More like $2 million to accomplish this. They can get an understanding of thousands of miles of overhead transmission line, thousands of miles of distribution line, tens of thousands of miles of distribution, and hundreds of miles of waterway every 30 days. That inspection cycle might have been a 5-year window before. Now they have, a combined many thousands of miles of assets that they'll know everything about every 30 days. I think that's why we're here every day.
I agree. And trust me, I'm an angry customer when I don't have my AC kicking. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I want to make sure they maintain those power lines as best they can. But I think what I don't want to gloss over is, $2 million is a lot of money. But in the overall scheme of things, losing customer revenue from a down power line or a faulty connection or switch, that's more than $2 million in a week of downtime or whatever maintenance and getting folks out there into the wild blue yonder to do this inspection. So I think that I want our audience to understand, yes, that's a lot of money to you and I and things, but to the big companies out there, that this is a good investment, to make sure that they proactively keep those power lines serviceable for their customers, you and I, who are used to having steady and stable energy. So I think that's a really cool use case too. So the market seems to be growing. It seems to be stabilizing a bit and trying to see where the providers are, the OEMs, the service providers, and things of this nature. We talked about how 108 may put a little bit of gasoline on that and start to allow for some more growth. But what do you see if you were to look into Kyle's crystal ball? I think that's a cool name for an album, but what do you see as some key market industry, changes and growth over the next few years? And do you see, a drive in demand? What do you see in the landscape for the next few years?
Well, I think we're going to continue to see industry consolidation. I think that component manufacturers are going to continue, or I think OEMs like Censys are going to continue to vertically integrate where we feel like we can succeed in the marketplace doing that vertical integration. And I think, as the industry's seen before, partnership is absolutely critical to succeed. No company, at least in this space, is able to do 100% everything vertically integrated. So I think partnerships are going to be very, very paramount to, on the business side, you could talk about partnerships creating a moat that allow for strong economic value and a blockade to competition. I don't look at partnerships like that. I look at partnerships as a way to rapidly adopt and force feed success to industries that are calling for a capability. And that's what I'm excited about the most. I do think we're going to see some consolidation. You're going to continue to see acquisition, mergers, things like that. I think you're going to continue to see that the energy industry will continue to lead the adoption curve for UAS. I think you're going to see public safety start to trickle down to more of the county level. Obviously, it's already there now. There's county public safety drone programs. But no longer are the feds going to be driving technology adoption. I think it's going to start to trickle down. You're going to see these localized operations providing real world value for their communities. And we're not going to have to worry about public perception with drones anymore. New Jersey was shooting them down and they saw drones and they were freaking out. Public perception is still not something that we as an industry have completely gotten over. But I think when you start to see that trickle down benefit of localized operations in our communities providing value, whether it's package delivery, energy reliability, or public safety, I think that'll start to really, really drive home why people are focusing on the problems they're focusing on, like Censys and delivery folks and others.
Yeah. Briefly, some advice for potential customers. What should they be looking for when they're looking for their solution? I know Sentaero is probably not a fit universally. I would hope we'd agree on that. But what are some of the things that they should look for when they're going out there and looking for their solution?
I talk a lot about square pegs and round holes and square pegs and square holes. And I say that because there's been times for the Sentaero in a certain industry. Obviously, we're not going to go inspect a bridge. We're not going to go inverted and inspect a bridge.
Sure.
No problem.
I mean, we can, but
there has been times throughout the Sentiero's product life for certain industries where we were a square peg in a round hole, and we steered clear of those industries. So when I talk to customers about what is the solution, what's the capability per dollar that actually makes this all worth it? One thing that we deal with a lot is customers that are subbing out to helicopters or fixed wings or what have you. And we start running down this kind of rubric of what are you paying per flight hour? How many times you need to fly this area? How big's the area? How many miles in length? All of these types of things. And sometimes we come away and say, hey, that Cessna 182 with the camera with the camera on the strut, that's a bang up solution. Keep doing that. Your data quality doesn't matter. The frequency is not that crazy. It's not in a super remote area with treacherous terrain. Like the UAS checkboxes are not getting checked here. And because ultimately what's going to happen if you sell that customer an aircraft or a solution that isn't a solution, they're going to be unsuccessful and the industry is going to stagnate. We've seen that. It's the same reason why training matters. If we sell an aircraft to someone who's unsuccessful because they crashed on day one, because they were not trained, are we scaling? Are they scaling? Nope, yeah. Nobody.
No. You're right. Yeah. You got to talk to the OEMs. You got to reach out to your OEMs and discuss what your needs are, what you're looking to accomplish, and let those professionals distill down your needs and see if it's the right fit for a particular program or technology. Don't go in there and buy the flashy, exciting thing because it might not fit your needs. I guess talking to people like Kyle at Censys and getting an expert evaluation of your needs is critical to understanding how to best solve, what you're looking for. So final question, and it's because I know I love poker and I know you do too. Give me really quickly a bad beat story. Go.
More often than not, I find myself in bad beat situations because I am an idiot and I like to play poker sometimes more than I like to win money. So I get into hands with all types of goofy holdings, pocket this, I'm in. 7-3 off suit, I'm in. It's 5-handed, I'm in. So I don't have a straight flush over royal flush or quads over quads. I don't have anything super cool like that. My bad beats are a combination of my poor choices and the volume at which I play poker.
All right. As long as we come out on top in the end, it's okay to take a few of those ridiculous chance plays. Kyle, it's been wonderful talking to you. I appreciate your time. Thank you for everything. Good luck at Censys, and we look forward to continuing to be a partner with you at USI. So great chatting with you. Thanks, man.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, Kyle. I hope you all enjoyed hearing from him and learning more about BVLOS flight and Censys Technologies. For more information on USI, please visit flyusi.org or email us at info@flyusi.org. Please like and subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you again on the Unmanned Podcast.